Welcome, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this Thursday evening. First off, I noticed that there's been a number of new members that have joined the server, and I'd like to extend to you a warm welcome. For our returning members, it's always exciting to see your names, and we thank you for your ongoing support. So we have an exciting event planned for you today. We will be starting off with an introduction of the new team, and I'll spend some time going through our plan for the year to come. This will be followed by the news, which will be presented by Jem, Jackson, and Christian. And we'll then take a break. And after the break, Yusef and Cal will be walking us through some interesting analytics from the ISSessions CTF 2021. And for those of you who are curious as to how the CTF was built, Louai will be presenting on the CTF infrastructure. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're excited to announce that our new executive team has grown to more than double in size. Each of these beautiful faces are all responsible for different components that we feel are necessary to fulfill our vision for ISS as a whole. I'll talk about our vision a little bit later in this presentation, but for now, I will start out by introducing our content team, which includes Chillin, Husher, Pablo, and Jackson. The content team is led by our event manager, Christian, and this team is responsible for, but not limited to, creating ISSessions meetup and presentation content, developing segments for ISSession nights, and planning and executing workshops and external events. It hasn't switched.
Yeah, I don't know if you had a different slide first one, like with the schedule and everything.
Oh, interesting. Okay, let me restream.
It's a good omen, I think.
How are we doing now?
You can see it now.
Perfect.
It looks
I can see
great.
it now.
I see lots of beautiful faces.
All right. So I'll show you the beautiful faces on the last slide. That's the whole team, and this is the content team. So next we have our CTF team. This team is led by Connor, our CTF logistic coordinator, and comprised of Kyle, our CTF infrastructure developer. Okay. So I guess everybody watch Kurt's stream. Right. So we have our CTF team. This is led by Connor, our CTF logistics coordinator, and comprised of Kyle, our CTF infrastructure developer, and our two CTF challenge builders, John and Min. This team is responsible for all things CTF, which include determining the location of the CTF and whether it will be held in person or online or both. So more to come on that. They also are responsible for acquiring sponsorships, developing the CTF itinerary, finding and guiding mentors, and much more. Last but not least, we have our support team comprised of our producer, Jack, who is taking care of the stream. Today, Kurt is handling that for him. Our community manager, Jill. Jill is responsible for student engagement, managing social media, liaisoning between external bodies such as the InfoSec clubs from other schools and the SSU. We also have our president, myself, and our former president and now vice president, Kurt. Together, we'll be managing the team as a whole while making sure that everything runs as smoothly as possible. Knock on wood, clearly, that could be improved upon today. I would like to thank Kurt and the former executive team, Yusef, Jamie, Louai, and Jem, who have done an incredible job last year with growing our community, throwing phenomenal workshops, and for being outstanding leaders and role models for our new and future team. Although there was a lot of work last year, the former executive team has been super committed and continued to help in their capacity as advisors for the club. So I want to thank them all. So the question that could be posed is, how do you manage such a large team that ensures that everyone is informed and deliverables are met? So here we can see the structure of our exec team and how it's organized. As I mentioned before, the content creator teams are managed by the event manager, the CTF is managed by the CTF coordinator, and we have our support team. The teams work with the support team in any areas that they may need. The team leads, quote unquote, report to the president and vice president on the progress of their respective teams. That said, as much as being exec means serving our members, we want that execs to have a learning experience as well as being part of the team. And so for this reason, all our meetings are open for any exec member to attend, to share ideas and thoughts and their experiences. Another question that one may ask is, why do we need so many executive members? So to answer that, I would like to first discuss our mission statement. So our mission is really to develop a community of confident, skilled, well-versed information security professionals by creating a supportive environment conducive for sharing and learning. And so we feel that through we feel that the number of members that we have chosen allows us to maximize our output potential without overburdening any particular component of the team. Each team and respective members all work towards this mission statement and measure their ideas against it. With a larger team, we will be able to turn ideas which have not been fully developed into high quality talks and events that we feel provide our members with value. So what are some of these ideas? Well, the club as it stands today has 4 core components. Each component has deliverables which each team is responsible for. We're still in the early stages of formalizing concrete plans for each of these components. However, what I'd like to share with you are some of the ideas that we are currently working on. So for meetings, given that we are currently exclusively online, one major aspect that we would like to improve is member engagement. This is actually not just for the meetings itself, but engagement in the Discord channel as well, during times when we don't have meetings or events taking place. Some ideas that we've planned around with this, so some ideas that we're playing around in this area include creating a discussion segment as part of our ISSession meeting talks, incorporating pollings during talks to make the talk interactive, and gamifying the Discord channel. With regards to outreach, we recognize that ISSessions has grown, not only being shared and known. ISSession has grown to be one of the largest, if not the largest, student-run information security meetup in Canada. Just to give you an example, in our last CTF, we had over 14 unique colleges or universities participate. In our Discord server alone, we have members from across Canada, the States, the UK. One of our goals this year is to increase our member diversity, but also to work with other information security clubs to develop a positive working relationship where we can collaborate on content to be delivered across our respective communities. We have already began reaching out to other clubs such as the Fleming Club, Mohawk, as well, to have discussions on collaboration. So this also ties us into our next topic, which is workshops. Last year, we were challenged with delivering workshops which were completely online. Even though this was not an ideal situation, we received a lot of positive feedback with regards to the content and the delivery. Simply put, we want to have more workshops. Throughout our experiences working with and competing against other schools, we recognize that our community could really benefit from the talent that exists within it. As such, we're asking you, our members, if you have any ideas, projects, talks you want to present, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And last but certainly not least is our CTF. There has been lots of discussions already as to what we would like to do for our next CTF amongst the team. Although we are currently in the early stages of planning, I think we can at least share our tentative dates, which we're thinking of actually having our CTF in February of next year. So if possible, we would like to have the CTF in person. Obviously, circumstances permitted, as we feel that the student body and sponsors would have a more engaging experience. We also have already started on the challenge development process and would like to provide the community with the option to submit potential challenges for review. So if you have any interest in challenge development or our appreciative CTF coordinator, Connor, would love to see what you've been working on. And that's basically it from me with regards to introductions. I personally am really excited for the year to come. Thanks everybody for listening. Next, we have the news roundup presented by Jem, Jackson, and Christian. So take it away, guys.
Wow. Amazing stuff. Super excited to see what this new awesome team comes up with the upcoming year. Just having the inside scoop on your little chat channels, I gotta say, the stuff that I've been overhearing is wild. So yeah, ISSessions is definitely in for a major treat this upcoming year. On that note, yeah, I think we've been keeping the news from you guys for the last like month and a half or however long it's been. So let's fire off some of the biggest or most interesting news of the last little while. I'm going to start it off with this cyber attack on Ireland. So according to Minister of State Ossian Smith, this attack that Ireland got hit with goes right down to the core of their health system. Smith went on to say that this is quite possibly the most significant cyber attack that the Irish state has ever faced. It actually forced the health services IT systems to shut down after this international attack. There was confirmation that this attack is a ransomware attack, and on the bright side, or however you look at it, the government is refusing to pay the ransom. This attack was noticed in the early hours of Friday morning. I think not this past Friday, but the Friday before that, at the health service executive. And luckily, the reason why they don't have to pay the ransom is because they did have a crisis response plan, which they immediately activated. This incident had a huge impact on the healthcare service across the country, including cancellations of visits, virtual appointments, postponements of anything related to electronic records, and just so much more stuff. The list was huge. I couldn't possibly fit it all on here. This attack was actually focused on accessing data that was stored on central servers inside of the HSE. And like I said, luckily they did have a contingency plan set in place, which enabled them to operate, I don't think at full functionality. I think it says something about just getting by, but using a paper-based system. The stuff that I just said is from the BBC article. I also checked out the same story 4 days after it happened from AP News. And according to AP News, they said that Ireland's health systems 4 days after are still struggling to restore the computers. They actually said that approximately 80,000 devices were affected. And as more information got developed, they were able to confirm that this attack is from the Russian ransomware group Conti, who demanded $20 million for the attack. And there was actually a few other attacks that were listed on from Conti. But yeah, for the last I think 6 months to a year, Conti has been very, very active in their attacks. So yeah, wild stuff.
For our next story, while it might not be related to the former and the latter in the sense of watching a cyber attack happen, I think has its own interest and its own type of controversy that has been big within the past few days. You may or may not have heard, but the University of Minnesota has actually been banned from contributing.
I think this is
Isn't it mine now?
I think this
Oh,
is yeah, I
that's
think
my
this is
bad,
Jackson's
that's my
pipeline.
bad.
No worries. I did the same thing last meeting, so yeah, no worries.
Okay, so this is another one you might have heard of, another ransomware attack. So this is the Colonial Pipeline in the U.S. So the pipeline is responsible for 45% of the fuel on the east coast of the United States. And they were hit by ransomware. And the ransomware attack completely disrupted the pipeline's operation. So basically, no fuel was flowing from one side to the other. So obviously, for a pipeline company, that is very bad. So officials in the US believe a ransomware group called DarkSide is to blame. And then there was an interview with the CEO of Colonial Pipeline, Joseph Blount, and he actually decided to pay the $4.4 million ransom. And when asked about his decision, he said, I know that it's a highly controversial decision. I didn't make it lightly. I will admit that I wasn't comfortable seeing money to go out the door to people like this. So it's the kind of thing where it's kind of the opposite of the story with Ireland, like Jem was saying, where they didn't really seem to have a plan for this. Obviously, this is more, it's a pipeline. You can't really make it's kind of harder to make a like backup for what if our pipeline stops working. But it was just the costs were getting too high. Fuel wasn't getting where it needs to be going. And the fuel was responsible for there was a lot of need for the fuel. So it was kind of the choice of, do you let people suffer and your business suffer, or do you let these hackers disrupt your business? And they decided to pay. You could debate about the situation forever, and yeah, that's the story.
All right, so now we're on to my story. I saw the dark reading article. I was like, yeah, that's me. Because every time I just love the dark reading articles, but I should have known that wasn't mine as soon as I saw it wasn't in dark mode. I always dark mode for everything, man.
Nice.
All right. So, as you may or may not have heard within the past month or so, is that the University of Minnesota has been banned from contributing to the Linux kernel after 2 students and an assistant professor committed malicious code to it. One of the topics that we hear often within the industry is what's more secure, closed source code or open source code. And this was what they attempted to try to figure out with their article. What they attempted to do was attempting to see how resilient open source software projects are to malicious updates. In this case, they targeted the Linux kernel. Greg Kroll-Hartman, which is actually one of the kernel maintainers, and specifically the one who executed the ban, said this to Dark Reading. I have no idea what a random researcher should or should not do. That's not my place to say. What I do object to is when people purposefully waste Linux kernel reviewers' time, which is what was happening here. On top of that, too, as he also mentions, is that the maintainers do not have the time to try and weed out purposely malicious updates. For those who aren't aware, many of the people who contribute to the Linux kernel are actually doing that voluntarily. So as you can imagine, they don't have the force that a company like Microsoft has when building their own operating system. This is all done voluntarily. The people responsible did not ask for permission beforehand, and this is where a lot of the people, or where most of the controversy comes from. Because when it comes to research papers, there's actually one of the guidelines in the Belmont Report, which is for human subjects of research, is that people have to have autonomy and they have to be able to be aware of what the conditions they are. As you know, they were pretty much testing it on the Linux maintainers without them them being aware or having any approval at all. It was technically violating those guidelines, which is a pretty serious thing in the academia world. There were at least 3 updates that could have added vulnerabilities. All submissions from the University of Minnesota have been pulled, and they're still under review as we speak. And I think the main things to take away from this article are these following questions. Do you believe it was justified to ban all of University of Minnesota for something that one group of students and a professor decided to do? Was it done unethically, or is it worth it for the greater cause?
Dang. Those are some heavy questions. Cool. So this next story, a very old flaw is used to develop a new attack, and it's based around Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi standard is debuted. It debuted in 1997, and since then, this technology has been exposed, has exposed devices to some form of an attack, one way or another. There's, I think, wireless attacks have been in existence since the existence of wireless connections, right? The most recent attack that was discovered by Matthew Van Hoff from New York University of Abu Dhabi is dubbed the frag attack, which is short for fragmentation and aggregation because the flaw has to do with how Wi-Fi chops up data and puts it back together. Now, fragmentation is done to improve performance of Wi-Fi when there's a lot of noise, so it's definitely something that, it's a good thing. It's a necessity. But when the data, because when the data is broken up into more manageable fragments, it's more efficiently transmitted. Now, unfortunately, as Van Hoff discovered, this allows the receiver to reassemble two fragments that belong to separate packets and even combine malicious data with legitimate information. This can ultimately lead to data exfiltration. Fragmentation can also allow attackers to inject malformed data, which allows them to become a man in the middle on the network. So it's a different way of also performing a man in the middle attack. Van Hoff says that every device he tested was vulnerable to something, but these mentioned exploits, or the utilizations of the frag attack, are actually very difficult to pull off. It's not something that can just be done with a couple of tools on Kali and you're off to the races. Microsoft, Samsung, Cisco, Intel, Linksys, Netgear, and Eero, and many others actually have already released patches for some of these vulnerabilities. Veteran Wi-Fi researcher Jim Palmer says, just like Van Hoff did, that these attacks are very, very difficult. Yes, these attacks do get to the heart of Wi-Fi networks, or how Wi-Fi works, but because of how difficult they are, there's not much for us to worry about. Not only that, to pull these off, you actually have to be in Wi-Fi range. You can't just, you're not doing this from the comfort of your home. You got to be very, very close. So, and protection. It's as simple as just keeping your devices updated, and when you're browsing, look for that HTTPS lock. It's not something for us to probably worry about, but crazy. Still, new exploits are being developed and vulnerabilities are being found. Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is a huge data breach with Air India. So Air India has revealed that the information of 4.5 million international passengers has been breached. The information included name, birth date, contact information, passport details, ticket information, Star Alliance and Air India frequent flyer data, and arguably most importantly, credit card data. So Air India does not believe that the credit card security numbers were accessed because those were stored in a different system. And they do not believe that the account passwords are breached. But they of course still recommended that everyone change their password and contact their credit card company. This breach came from a company called SITA, which processes airline data for many different airlines. And this is part of a larger vulnerability that has been exploited recently with other airlines, including Germany's Lufthansa, Finland's Finnair, Air New Zealand, Japan's All Nippon, and Air Japan, as well as South Korea's Jeju Air and Singapore Airlines. And this is also one of many recent security breaches at Indian-based companies from a variety of different industries, not just air travel. So I thought this was kind of interesting because it kind of shows two different trends. So the first one is that airlines seem to be a big target. So because if you think about it, how many people take a plane per year? Probably not as many because of COVID, but otherwise that's a lot. And you get so much information from them to be able to fly, and that's all has to be stored somewhere. So if there's a breach, you can find out a lot. And then the other trend is that India seems to be kind of a hotspot for hacker activity. Within the last few months, there have been many large breaches at different Indian companies, anywhere from an air travel company like this, or even a grocery store chain. So lots of different places are being attacked. It seems like it's kind of a hotspot for hacker activity. Okay.
Good old SolarWinds. We never get enough of this story. So initially when the SolarWinds breach occurred, is that many people believe that the actual breach had started around October 2019. However, during the RSA conference that actually happened within the past month, I believe, new evidence from the SolarWinds CEO at the RSA conference reveals that their network was probed by attackers since January 2019. Now, even though it might not be a whole year difference from January 2019 to October 2019, that's about a 10-month difference. That's a long time for people to be inside your system. And keyword is that at least January 2019. If we start hearing 2018, that it hasn't been ruled out yet. So we'll get to that part later. But pretty much with the previous CEO, Kevin Thompson, is that he blamed an intern for posting an FTP password on GitHub. However, the new CEO, Sudhakar Ramshina, said that this actually had nothing to do with the breach. According to their new CEO, the attackers did everything possible to hide in plain sight. Now, for those who don't know, this breach was actually was based from an APT that's actually Russia backed. So one of the main things that people have been talking about for a company like SolarWinds, even though they're a strong security company and they're well known in the industry, what can you really do against an APT threat that's backed by a government as big as Russia or China? And the CEO himself had said this as well. And it's like, they had little resources that they had to prepare against that. The SolarWinds CISO, so Chief Information Security Officer, can now stop releases from going into production and appointed a new committee for cybersecurity on their board of directors. So one of the main things I think that really need to be brought up is, do you think that SolarWinds has done enough to mitigate future attacks? Does this pretty much rely on following like NIST or ISO standards, where you're just following everything that you're supposed to? Are you supposed to go beyond that? Is there really any proper way to mitigate APT threats on the corporate side, or should we be looking at government to protect us from these threats? And then on top of that too, probably one of the scariest things that I think that come out of this is how many more businesses, how many more critical infrastructure currently has APT threats or other hackers just lying dormant in their systems. Because remember, the only reason why this ended up getting caught in the first place was because of FireEye's tools being caught or being, being taken from the network. If that had not happened, this likely could have still been going on today. And who knows how many others like SolarWinds are currently going on right now.
Awesome. And yeah, my last story is basically about how the super popular, super powerful pen testing, I don't even want to call it a tool, it's just it does so many things, but toolkit Cobalt Strike is being used by the bad guys a lot. Along with Metasploit, security analysts are saying that these two tools are responsible for hosting and facilitating actually over 25% of all malicious C2 servers in 2020. Famous APTs, advanced persistent threats. Actually, I should first say a C2 server is a command and control center. It's a crucial element in some of the biggest hacks. It basically is it's a server where attackers maintain connections, communications. They send files and payloads, and it's crucial stuff. Famous APTs like Carbonac and Cozy Bear are using it as their go-to tool. Most threat actors are actually using legacy, pirated, or cracked copies of the software, because if you actually go on the Cobalt Strike site, it's not cheap, right? It's definitely pricey stuff, and usually you got to register an account to be able to get it. So it makes sense that they're using the aforementioned versions of the software. Abuse of Cobalt Strike has been linked to malware campaigns, ransomware deployment, data exfiltration, and a bunch of other stuff. It makes it really easy to create malleable C2 architectures, and this, well, it complicates the tracing of what groups or which individuals actually own these C2 servers. Not all threat actors use it in equal ways. Some of them are practicing very, very bad OPSEC. They're reusing infrastructure on multiple attacks. And others are the exact opposite. They're being very sparing with how they're using Cobalt Strike. Some use it on many attacks, and others are, they really just use it for the big ones, right? And I just saw here CK said, remember, these guys are running a business. They also want standardized tools. Of course. And I think that's all the more true when a tool is as intense as Cobalt Strike, so to speak. So yeah, probably a good thing we also have access to the tools as well, but scary stuff for sure. think Jackson already did the story.
No, this just has the
Mm,
other
did-
note. So I'll just pull it up on my computer real quick, and I'll just read it.
Oh,
This
right,
just
right.
has
Yeah,
the
the
wrong,
pictures. Yeah, the picture's the right one, but the notes are the old one. Yeah.
So
Good point.
basically, from what I remember from what my notes while I'm opening them, so it turns out that stalkerware apps are just completely riddled with security bugs. So for those of you who don't know, a stalkerware app is basically an app that pretends to be something else. So you can download it on your phone. So some of them pretend to be like a parental control app, or kind of similar to like a Find My iPhone kind of thing, or even like a personal safety, or what is it? Or anti-theft apps. But really, they kind of just pretend to do that, and really they record information from your phone or device, and they send it to a attacker. And so these applications need to be manually installed. So that's why they have to be marketed as a certain thing for people to download them. Or, of course, physical security, where someone can just go and download it on your computer if you're not looking, or on your phone. And so they record from a bunch of different types of information. They can record your screen. They can record with your microphone. They can gain access to accounts and apps on your phone or device. So really just not good at all. But the interesting thing with this is it was found that these apps, besides the apps being security threats themselves, they were full of security threats. So the this article mentions a study that looked at 58 different stalkerware apps. And in those 58, there were over 150 security vulnerabilities. So that's almost like 3 per app on average. And so the interesting thing is with this is it would allow a different attacker to almost hijack the transmitted data while it's being sent to the first attacker, which then they could record or modify as they want. So I just thought that was kind of interesting, because it was like the original attackers were kind of lazy with their own security. So then another attacker just kind of can hop in and piggyback off it. And you don't think that the app that is stealing your information is going to have your information stolen from it. It's kind of like a hacker taking advantage of hacker kind of thing.
With your last sentence there, Jackson, I think it's fitting for the quote, "There is no honors among thieves." But moving on to our,
It's a
oh yeah, go on.
dog world.
Yeah, and
Or
it's like
hacker eat hacker.
pretty much. I mean, we see it from time and time again. You know, there's zero honor among thieves, and it's always just pretty much all what it comes down to is just opportunity, right? Anyways, moving on to our next story is we're going to be talking about the recently discovered 0-day exploits against Microsoft Exchange Server. This was disclosed around March 2nd. Tim Junio, a senior VP at Palo Alto Networks, say that they have evidence that shows hackers have begun scanning vulnerable servers within just 5 minutes of the breach. So there was also some other interesting figures that I found in the article that need to be stacked on top of this as well. Now, this isn't just a one-time thing. While it is considerably faster, well, just considerably faster in the context of it, other zero-day vulnerabilities, especially with internet-facing devices, scans usually begin within just 15 minutes. That is insanely fast. Nothing compared to 5 minutes for sure, but it's especially even more alarming when you consider the fact that global enterprises typically take around 12 hours for vulnerable systems to be discovered. When Tim was asked about why it takes so long, one of the things, and I think one of the key things that he did mention, is that a lot of companies don't have proper asset management or proper, you know, lists or databases that they're able to go in straight and just kind of look directly and say, oh, this server is vulnerable, and these ones are all safe. And I think that's probably one of the most important things when it comes to mitigating these type of threats. On what another alarming statistic that came from this report as well is that only a $10 rent on cloud computing power is enough for malicious threat actors to scan servers which is extremely cheap. And when you consider that the price of cybercrime is only going up and up and up as days go on, $10 isn't even like, it's not even a penny down the well. Um, so on a similar related note with Microsoft products, as more people especially are forced into the remote work industry because of COVID-19, RDP scans, specifically port 3389, have been on the rise, along with brute forcing and credential hacking. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that there's a 32% increase in RDP being used. So I think the only or one of the big questions from this one that we can bring up is, how do you prepare for these 0-day vulnerability threats? Because realistically, what can you do? Is it pretty, again, like as we mentioned with SolarWinds, is it pretty much just following guidelines to the best of your ability and having all of your asset management, or is there something more that we should expect?
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So for now, next we will just take a quick break, maybe about 10 minutes. So Jill will post the CCR link for whoever wants to get CCR recognition, and the CCR code is on the slide. Yusef and Kyle will be presenting on the ISSessions CTF 2021 analytics. So take it away, guys.
Cool. Thanks, Nash.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. I'm Yusef. The slide before said that it's presented by me, but I do want to say that Kyle probably did more work than I did with regards to this. So I do want to give Kyle credit where credit is due. Thank you, Kyle. Wouldn't be able
Thank
to do
you.
this without.
You did a lot of work too. It's not just on me.
But yeah, so I guess we're just gonna dive into some cool stats and things that Kyle and I found. And I hope you all enjoy it. So yeah, so first off, this slide is split into part 1 and part 2. These are like all the challenges. And so the bar to the right is the incorrect submissions, and then the bar to the left is the correct submissions. So orange is incorrect and red is correct. So I guess it's just really interesting here for me to look at like these two right here. So one of them is history, and then sponsored containers, sponsorized containers. And then this one, Crypto Corner 2. Oh, you can't. Nice. Well, interesting.
I believe history was one of the trivia questions. So I think a lot of people are trying to guess on that one a little bit.
Clearly. Yeah, so that's this one, and then part 2 is this one. So the far left with the really high incorrect submissions is intelligence, one team at a time, and then the one kind of in the middle is secure shell hell. And like all these at the end are your what are they called? Workshops. So I guess it's good that they don't have that many incorrect submissions. But yeah.
All right, so a little mirror of the previous two slides. Here's a nice line graph of the highest incorrect submissions, and as you can see, by far, sponsorized containers was way up there, followed closely by history. Goes down a little bit to Crypto Corner 2, and it starts to trail off quite significantly, and we sort of start to get to like a nice baseline level.
Yeah, I think this one's kind of funny to me because the fourth one is my challenge that I made for like the pre-CTF meeting thing. It's funny to see that it had the fourth most incorrect submissions, but then again, it did change the flag, so I'm guessing people just thought it was the same flag versus just what it originally was.
You should feel sort of proud about that, though. It means you made a good challenge.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe. Kurt, can you guys see this now? Like these?
Yeah, we can see that now.
Okay, awesome.
All right, what's the next slide?
It wants to switch. There we go.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kat.
Yeah, so this one is the highest successful submissions. It's surprising to me that Trend Micro and Introduction to ND Vulnerability Research was actually so high. I believe it's actually one of the workshops, right? Or is that why?
Yes. Yeah, a couple of these are the workshops.
Some of these are the workshops, which is why they're like slightly outliers. But like some of the ones that were not the workshops were like things like Pick Me Outside, great name by the way, quantum factorization, and also Linux commands are strong with this one. But it's nice to see.
To show how strong our Linux is in our program.
Yeah, it's quite impressive actually, I'd have to say. A lot of good system admin challenges this time around as well, you know.
Absolutely. And Kurt, I think this one was your challenge, checkmate in 3. So I guess proud. I don't know if you'd be proud or not proud about that.
Well, wasn't that the one that was done as an example one the week before?
On how to CTF.
It was. But so was my challenge, and that had the 4th highest incorrect submission. So
That is true.
Anyways, let's see what's next. So here we have the successes and failures per category. So orange is again incorrect, and red is correct. This is really surprising to me. I guess, like Kyle said, a lot of people just um, would guess challenges for trivia, which makes sense. We did give unlimited fries, so maybe that's something you CTF team want to think about for next CTF when it comes to the trivia challenges. But then the rest of them are fairly even. The packet analysis and reversing are the lowest, which I guess makes sense, as well as threat hunting. But yeah,
Yeah.
Kyle, anything to add here?
Yeah, I actually sort of like the fact that we had no limits this year. It was quite it makes it more fun. Makes it more fun.
I wouldn't say limit everything, but the trivia, because like people are just gonna throw guesses at it.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
And I know CK was saying that people not from Sheridan are trying to brute force the flag, but to be fair, even people from Sheridan, I know I was trying to figure out
yeah.
what year that ISSessions was first began. I had no idea, but I might have been at least like 10 of those miss guesses.
I just
Fair
did
enough,
the NSEC one this weekend, and while there wasn't an unlimited thing, if you spammed like 3 or 4 or 5
Yeah.
within like 30 seconds of each other, you were basically prevented. You had a temporary suspension for like I think it was like 5 or 10 minutes or something like that, where you could submit something,
Yep,
which
yep,
would
yep.
potentially be an idea or something you could look at.
I remember
Yeah, it's
that.
definitely something to think about.
Not an outright limit, but at least prevents people from like sending like 16 tries in like 30 seconds because they're not quite sure with that one character or something.
Yeah.
Right, but then
Actually,
you know,
behind the scenes, we actually did have some rate limiting, on the amount of submissions. But I think it was you had to. I can't remember what Louai was saying, but I think it was like if you
It was
did
just-
10 in a minute,
it was-
they'll ban you.
10 in a minute, yeah.
Yeah.
And
It
will
wouldn't
it
ban you
ban
or
or
anything. It would just no, nothing would happen. I think Louai, correct me if I'm wrong. It would just like raise an alert on Elastic, and then
Well,
Louai
a
would
couple of
follow
things.
up.
A couple of things would happen. So one, I would get an alert on Elastic, and then it would also put a cooldown period of like a minute or 2 minutes, so that you can't keep doing that. So it'll
if you-
say like, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so if you didn't get any warnings or anything like that, then it means you weren't spamming enough.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't really care if you tried to click. You tried to manually put in submissions. We were more concerned about things like you wrote a script that is trying to brute force submissions, which is why it was kept at 10 per minute. Because a script would definitely do like 50 to 100 flags per minute, probably even more.
Yeah, good point. Fair point.
Cool. Kyle, go ahead.
All right, so this is a really interesting graph. Pretty much what it's discussing is how many participants we had broken down per year. So as you can see, like for our first years is about like 19% of the whole competition participants were actually in their first year. About 23% of them were in second year, and by far the biggest group was the third year students, which was 31%. I guess like a lot of people are trying to get excited for their co-ops coming up and stuff like that. Fourth year it is about 90%, and 8% of them was actually alumni. I'm really impressed with how many first years actually came out. I think it might have been like a lot of people's first CTF that they had attended. I'm really thankful that they were able to come out and get a little taste of what it's all about.
I agree. This is something that I really thought was important to show. Just because the distribution is always nice. I was fairly confident, like even going in, like you can ask the rest of the team. Like I told them that I think third years are going to do the best, and going on into that. If I go to the next slide, this is the number of solves and fails per year, but it's proportionate to what was here. Like you can see the graphs look or the charts or whatever they're called, look very, very similar. But yeah, This is weird though. I feel like it should have shown. I'm annoyed. Should have
Sorry.
shown the actual numbers.
Oh yeah, because we broke it down by percentage.
Yeah, that's annoying. Oh man,
Yeah.
I could pull that up later at the end.
Yeah,
But I
we can get those
think
numbers for people.
yeah, it's fine. But yeah, it was somewhere around like I think. Actually, I don't want to just throw out numbers. But yeah, it's very proportionate to what this is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this I like this slide a lot actually, to be honest with you. Um, so these two teams are the most carried teams, and what do we classify as carried? It's when one person has a large proportion of the submitted points for that team. So
This is funny. Just like point out, like regardless of like this team was I think came in second or third place, the second most carried team. But to
yeah,
be fair, they wouldn't have gotten second place if these three people didn't also help out because I know the SK like freaking killed it, but these guys also did do very well within like comparison to the rest of the participants. It's just SK's like a different breed. So
yeah. Same with HFC. Two great
yes, and
CTFers.
HFC. Agreed. Agreed. And then to that, we thought it would be fair to show the most collaborative team.
Yeah.
So this is Banana Bat. And yeah, so like they're all within like almost like 4 or 5% of each other, plus or minus 4 or 5%, which is really nice to see. But yeah, I think this is very. Go ahead.
Yusuf, this is what happens when you get to fourth year, right? The amount of wisdom increases, right? So you start collaborating more, being a team more, not like the third years, you know what I mean? And then you win. I'm just
Okay.
putting that out there.
But that's fine. I mean, I'm not going to disagree, but sure, whatever. To be fair, though, third years did get more flag correct submissions, so whatever. Just saying. Yeah.
So this one is just pretty much the number of solves per school. Obviously shared in college, like no need to, not trying to brag, but obviously we had the most amount just because there was the most amount of participants from shared in college. And then the second most, shout out to Fleming College, really impressive. You guys had almost like around 200 solves for the school. Followed closely with Seneca and York U, and then it sort of drops off from there. What else this slide shows is that the amount of different schools that we actually had participating today, or in this year's CTF. It wasn't just Sheridan students; it was schools from all over the world, all over the country, all over the place. You know, like University of Toronto, Ontario Tech U, Brock University. Great turnout from different schools, and thanks for everyone for showing up.
Yeah, and just to like add to that point, this is the list of people who actually solved challenges, but there were I think 4 other schools that just didn't solve challenges, but it just goes to show that the awareness was raised and people did get the message. So hopefully that will carry into the coming CTF that the new CTF team ends up doing this year.
Yeah, let's get more schools in this. It's amazing.
Agreed. And Kurt, to your point, I can definitely show that. If anyone's interested, I can like go pull up the Excel sheet with all this data, and show the proportion, the ratings. But yeah, it's the same thing. It's very proportionate to how many participants were in the competition. Like Kyle said, Sheridan was the most, Fleming second most, then Seneca, and then it drops down from there. But yeah. And then this one is the top 15 user grades. So what's interesting with this is not that their submissions is their grade. So for example, that is your correct submissions divided by your total submissions. So total submissions is incorrect plus correct submissions. And I just thought this is super interesting to see, mainly just because I wanted to see like the top people. I know SK was the most, like had the most solves. I really wanted to see like that grade. So just looking at this is really cool. And this was also, I filtered out, I think, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, we filtered out
150.
100, they had to have 150 submissions, or was it 40 submissions? It was
Oh,
150
you're
for
right.
yeah, for users it was 40. So you
Yeah,
had
you're
to
right.
you've had to have had 40 um to actually get onto this list, total submissions. So yeah, it's really interesting. This is like super interesting to me.
Very impressive by
This is the only
SK to
map,
have the highest
yeah,
amount of
like
points
super
and the highest amount of
exactly.
the highest grade.
Exactly. I completely agree. That's like insane. Because I'll tell you, like most of the people are like below 20%.
Yeah.
um but yeah,
Also,
this is
shout out to my buddy Blackjack. Great job. Like it.
yeah, good job to everyone. This is awesome.
Yeah, good job. Good job to everyone though. All right, so here's sort of the same metric as before, but this is broken down by teams instead. The other team was the cutoff was for the individuals, it was cutoff was 40 submissions, but for the teams, the cutoff was 150 submissions, and then we sorted it that way. So the group with the highest grade was Bits Please. Very impressive. Great name. And I think that was SK's team, right? Bits Please. And so that's sort of makes sense that they would also have the highest team grade. Followed up by Two Girls, One Comp, and Snack Overflow, and many others. There's a lot of impressive people here. Two of the Fleming colleges had a really good team grades, as well as my own teams. Actually, fourth semester, I'm surprised we made it.
And they had you on the team, obviously they'd make it.
Thanks. Oh shucks, you know.
Now, Loki, you probably brought them down from like.
I'm not gonna lie, I
fourth
probably
place.
did.
I'm joking. I'll play with you. And then this is the last one. These
I
are just
love this
basically.
slide.
I guess we went through what was it, Kyle? 7,000 flag submissions.
Yeah, and tried to pick out some of the most unique ones, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm
Some
not gonna go
people-
through all this.
I
Wait,
just
go
want to mention though that some people were being very naughty, trying to do some SQL injection on us.
Yeah, right there.
And then got promptly banned by Cloudflare.
I also I found it really hilarious as one person was just trying to submit all the different cardinal coordinates, like west, north. They shoved it in northeast over there. One of the most unique ones that was really surprising was will you give me the flag, you little shite?
Twice.
No, it wasn't actually twice. It was
Oh,
actually
it was
30 different submissions of this, pretty much the same variation of that.
Yeah.
Oh, I
It
meant
was-
the fact that I made it on this screen twice. You've got it at the bottom, and then again with all the pounds.
Yeah, it came up quite a bit. It was really surprising. I think we should probably look at this challenge to see why that is. But yeah, like 30 different submissions of that. And one of my favorite submissions was the Mayo, 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 Mayo. And I think we have some people in here that would love that.
Yeah, because Louai loves mayo, or someone loves mayo, the team. And by loves I mean hates. But yeah. And that's it. Thanks
That's
everyone.
it. Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
Nash, do you think I have time to go through the Excel sheet and try and get the numbers that people asked for, or sounds good.
Yeah, we can show it after.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Kyle and Yusef. So next we have the one and only Louai talking about the infrastructure build.
Good. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Okay. And if someone can just let me
I think your audio just went out, Louai.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Can everyone see my
Yeah, we can see
stream
your
on Discord.
Discord.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to. Here. Cool. All right. So you just heard about some of the analytics that went into the CTF, and now we're going to hear a little bit about the infrastructure. Before I get started, though, I just want to say shout out to the new team. They're all awesome. As you can see, they've already made it went leaps and bounds in improving our production quality. I mean, come on, that jingle at the beginning. How many people heard the jingle at the beginning? That jingle made my life. It made my day. I don't know why we've never had a jingle, but we have a jingle, so that's good. The second thing that I want to say is just shout out to Nash. Nash doesn't really speak about himself very much, so I'm gonna speak about him a little bit. I hope that's okay. So Nash actually was on the exec team last year. Nash was a phenomenal exec. He took on things like CR, like the stats presentation that you saw during the CTF. And he delivered big time. He was also the one responsible for the Try Hack Me license and getting that deal through. He was also the person who got our grant from the SSU and dealt with them and made sure that we had their support and, more importantly, their money. So Nash was an amazing treasurer and just an exec overall, and I think he's going to do an incredible job as president. He is like the kindest person, and you're all gonna love him so. I also want to mention, by the way, did you guys know he's published? Nash actually has a paper about like real life forensics, like for homicide, which is super cool. He like analyzed blood splatter or something like that. I'm sure he'd love to tell you about it after this meeting. So yeah, Nash is cool, and all of the execs that we've actually got on this here are really cool people that have just shown during their interviews how much they care about this club, how involved they want to be, and they had so many cool ideas. So I'm really excited to see what they're. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about infrastructure. So during the CTF, you might have gone and connected to CTFD. I mean, hopefully, right? To submit flags, to make your account. You might have, as a volunteer or as a participant, tried to solve a challenge. So, for example, you might have used Netcat or SSH to connect to a TCP-based challenge. Or you might have a web page for, that one challenge, like Secret Sauce, right, with the Mayo. So, I guess this presentation is for those of you that want to learn about the plumbing, if you will, that sort of underpin. So we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff today that are sort of transparent to you, but they are actually integral to deliver a CTF. So if you don't know me, my name is Louai. If you're like in first year or something, joined the program. My name is Louai. I was president 2 years ago. I was vice president last year, and now I'm currently an advisor. So let's dive in. What's on our agenda today? First, we're going to talk about CTF objectives. And you're going to see that those lend themselves into infrastructure objectives as well. We're going to talk about ISSessions CTF from like a step-by-step perspective. I'm going to try to really break things down. And we're going to go over the various logical components that, in my opinion, make for a great CTF or make for a fully featured CTF. So those would be like the game facilitation component, the access component, the monitoring component, and then how we actually bring all of that together with some automation and with some sexy DevOps. So without further ado, again, let's dive into our objectives, which is the first point. So our first objective was to try and deliver a reusable, fully featured CTF environment that supports small to medium-sized CTFs. And here we were thinking about somewhere between 200 to 500 participants. And this is generally where most CTFs fall. So we wanted to deliver something that was both reusable for next for like a future ISSessions team, and also something that is fully featured. So let's discuss a little bit about what we mean by fully featured, and I actually want your input. So we're going to do a little bit of a scenario. So this is Kyle, our CTF infrastructure engineer. So Kyle, you know what, dude, you're fired. Okay, everybody else, congratulations. You've been promoted to Chief CTF infrastructure engineers at ISSessions. And you have to plan next CTF. So I want to know, what would you consider to be a fully featured CTF? What are some of the components or services or technologies that you think would be integral to delivering a CTF? I'm just going to actually come out here and watch the chat just so I what you are. Just post it in. Oh, is there any? Okay, is that better? Yeah, Connor, challenges are pretty important. As you will obsessively go over for the year. Okay, anything else, like infrastructure-wise, what do we need? Domains, good, yeah. So we need our we need domains that resolve into IP addresses, which are assigned to hosts in our infrastructure, sure. An internet connection, yeah. Hosted challenges, good. So, and I guess what we're going to be going over is how do we actually host those challenges in a scalable manner? Because we have like 32 challenges or something like that that needed to go up. And imagine like configuring a server for each one of those challenges. It's not fun, and that's definitely not what we did. Containers, okay, yeah. Containers are going to be used quite a bit in the infrastructure that I'm about to present. And they play a very, very big part. A theme song, sure. Theme songs are the bread and butter of a cool CTF. We didn't have themes, but North Sections did, and it was awesome, and I know that the current team is actually considering that. Kurt, is my voice better? Okay, cool. You need a Louai? No, you definitely don't need a Louai. I'm not part of the infrastructure, I promise. But some people claim I'm an artificial intelligence, apparently. Namespaces when you're too lazy to create containers, okay. Louai, okay, good. All right, so this is devolving into not what I expected, so let's move on. So I'll show you what I consider to be the fundamental components that you would need for a CTF. By the way, Kyle, you're rehired. I just spoke to Nash, yeah, mentally, and we just agreed that you're back on the team. Okay, so these are some of the components that I would think of. So the first would be like a game facilitation component, right? So you need registration, you need flag submission, like a flag submission system. You might need a hint system, and then you might need a scoreboard for people to, know what their score is, of course. And then you might need support for both file-based challenges, so things like a reversing challenge, or hosted challenges. So again, a web-based challenge, like an SSH, like a box that you need to SSH into, that sort of thing. Then you would need an access component. And what I mean by an access component there is essentially how do you control traffic and allow traffic that is entering your environment? And you can think about things like proxying, load balancing. How do you provide secure access? And then how do you limit the rate at which requests are coming in the scenario where somebody's trying to cheat or somebody is, for example, like there's like a kind of an opportunistic like denial of service attack or something like that. Then there's a monitoring component. So a lot of people, when I say monitoring, they think like security monitoring. But we're going to talk about monitoring in a very broad sense here. So we want to know about statistics so that we can do the presentation every year that Kyle and Yusef just did. We want to have anti-cheat monitoring in place to keep everybody honest. We also, and this is a really big component, monitoring system, monitoring containers, monitoring application health. that's going to be really important because I don't want to be the last person to know that there was like a CPU failure on a server in my CTF. And then there's a whole bunch of other security monitoring that you can do. Then there's a management component. So this is like having a dedicated management VM, having tools installed on that VM so that you can manage the environment. And then we get into things like technical processes. So you can think of things like challenge development. So how do you make challenge development as easy as possible and not the absolute nightmare that it is? Okay, by maybe standardizing how people submit challenges and having like proper development pipelines in place. And then you want to bring all of these components together using DevOps tools. And here we're talking about things like provisioning resources maybe on the cloud. We're talking about configuring hosts, deploying services, and doing that in a short period of time so that you don't spend hours and hours and hours doing that, and then you find out later that you made a mistake. Okay. So those, I would say, are all the components. The reason I place these components at the very beginning is because if you take away one thing out of this presentation, right, I want you to take away the different components that make up a CTF, because what you'll realize is that they're actually very much the same components that would make up any kind of environment, right? These are the things that you would likely have to think about with like, a twist here and there, like challenge development, because we are in a CTF. So even if you're like in first year or second year and you don't really understand what I'm talking about, if you can take away one thing, take away those logical components. Okay, and then what is objective number 2? So objective number 2 is to actually try as much as possible to simplify our operating model to deliver a highly accessible CTF in a COVID-19 world. So what I mean there is that regardless of what country you're in, right, because you're not in Canada, you don't have to attend classes in Canada, we're in COVID-19, or no matter whether you're in first year or fourth year, you can easily connect to the CTF. I'll tell you like a story that happened to me when I first did my first ISSessions CTF. I had no idea what a VPN even was. Okay, a virtual private network. And so when somebody was asking me to install one, I really struggled. And eventually, thankfully, I had the president at the time. His name is Cameron, and he came over and he helped me figure things out. But that's not something that we could have done really in an online environment. I mean, we have some ability to troubleshoot, but it is severely limited. And so we wanted to make the CTF online, globally accessible, which meant we probably want to use cloud as much as possible. And we wanted to make it trivial to connect. So just like you would register on any web application, you would register for our CTF. And then objective number 3 is, again, coming back to that automation piece. We want to cut down the time that it takes to build a CTF environment from months to minutes. So again, this means aggressively automating everything. So if you think about what are the core deliverables of a CTF, right? They're things like challenges, right? People remember their originality and their variety. People remember learning opportunities. They remember networking opportunities. They remember the look and feel of a CTF, like the theme and the storyline, right? And the unique experiences that they sort of had along the way. But nobody remembers the infrastructure unless the infrastructure fails. So then why are we spending so much time every single year working on infrastructure if that is not our core deliverable? That should be something that we can automate. That should be something that we should simplify for the next team to take over, and that is what we were trying to do. Okay, so those are our objectives. So let's actually start by building ISSessions CTF. So before I begin, let's talk a little bit about containerization, because that is going to be a big part of what I'm going to get into. So what containerization is it's a way of packaging code, libraries, runtime configs, all that stuff into a standalone image. So instead of using a VM, which has things like, which emulates hardware, right? A container just has the things you need to run your application, right? And the benefits of having things containerized, right, is that containers are really lightweight. Again, there's only the stuff that you need. Containers can run anywhere, right? As long as you have the Docker runtime, for example, you can run a Docker container on any host, regardless of whether it is Windows or Linux. containers, or I guess images, the images that containers are based on, they are extensible and they're easy to share. So for example, if I create an image for CTFD, for ISSessions CTF, and I put all the stuff in that image that people will need, I can easily share that with the next team, and they can just reuse that image, right? Or they can extend that image. Let's say they find out that they need more things, they can actually go and put more layers on the image. And then finally, it can be argued that containers are more secure, right? They provide complete isolation from the host. And because you only have what you need to run your application, your attack surface is much smaller. So they're they're not as easy to compromise. And if they are compromised, you can kill the container, spin up a new one, and the attacker's out. And it's really hard to do something like a container escape, right? So what you should know is every service in ISSessions CTF was actually packaged as a Docker image and then was deployed using Docker Compose. And here I mean services, not hosted challenges. Hosted challenges were also packaged as Docker images, but then they were deployed on something called Kubernetes, which I'll discuss later. Okay, so there's a ton of benefits to containers, and they're used throughout. Just remember that. And we'll see a couple of examples. So let me actually show you like what I mean by containerization, because that was probably all very theoretical, right? So I'm going to use an analogy that I think either Nick or MadSprite shared with me like 2 years ago, which is the containers are like a layered cake. Okay, you start with like a base layer. Okay, so in this case, we're starting from Nginx, from the Nginx image that Nginx publishes. And then every single one of these lines is like adding another layer on top of the cake. So here we are copying files in, we are changing permissions, and then we are switching to a non-root user, right? So now I've baked this cake. A Docker file is just the recipe for your cake. You haven't built it yet, you just specified the recipe. Docker Compose is a way of like to keep the cake analogy. It's like if you were at a very big wedding and you had multiple cakes, you want to make sure that all of those cakes are like along the same like flavor or theme. I'm struggling to find a good analogy, but essentially it's a way of connecting all of your containers together such that they work together. So to give you an example, here I have an Nginx container, which is Nginx, I'm using it as a reverse proxy. And then I have another FileBeat container, which is a sidecar container that works with this container to take Nginx logs and then deliver them to a logging cluster that I have. Okay. So Docker Compose allows us to orchestrate multiple services and make them work together. And here we specify various runtime parameters. Like for example, in this container, I want to expose these ports to the host. And I want to expose this volume. And I want both of these containers to use this volume. Right? Because the Nginx container writes logs into this directory here, and then the FileBeat container reads logs from this directory and then ships them over to Elk, or Elasticsearch Logstash and Kibana. I'm sure I'm mentioning, by the way, a lot of words that you know, if you're like in first year or second year, you probably don't know, but just bear with me, I will get to them. Just try to internalize as much as what I'm saying. Okay. So we're going to start actually building an infrastructure diagram, and I just want you to remember this legend that I have here. So a GCP network, which is Google Cloud Platform, which is one of the big three clouds, right, is going to be in blue. Our subnets are going to be in green. Our hosts are going to be this kind of like, what is it called? Rectangle, cube-ish that I have here. And then our Docker containers are going to be these pentagons, which look like really delicious biscuits for some reason. Just remember the host and the Docker container icons. That's really the most important part. These will be pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need some space to build our project. And that space is just like a project on Google Cloud Platform. Google Cloud Platform calls a network a virtual private cloud. Okay, it's just a fancy name for a network. And our network was in Montreal, Canada. So GCP has a data center in Montreal, and I'm going to put all of my cloud resources, all of my hosts, my IP addresses, everything that I ever make in Montreal, Canada. So yeah, think about it like that. In this space, we're going to have 3 subnets. So we're going to have a DMZ subnet, we're going to have a hosted challenges subnet, and we're going to have an internal subnet. Now, just so you know, and I kind of have to mention this, so I only create subnets here for organizational purposes. In GCP, subnets don't work the same way as they do in a normal traditional network. So if we were in like class and you decided to expose a web application on port 8000 on your computer, if I'm on the same subnet, I, by default, can connect to port 8000 on your computer. All hosts on the same subnet can see each other. But in Google Cloud Platform VPC, or Virtual Private Cloud, by default, if we were in the same scenario, I still wouldn't, even if we're on the same subnet, I still wouldn't be able to go and connect to your computer. So you kind of have to imagine that every pair of hosts in cloud, or in GCP at least, have a firewall between them, which is kind of like saying that every host is in its own subnet. Okay, and this is a bit different and difficult to understand, but just know I'm not creating subnets here because, you know, I want to have a proper DMZ, for example, which like buffers traffic. It's purely for organizational purposes. I want hosted challenges to go here. I want my DMZ, like internet-facing hosts to go here. And I want anything that has to do with game facilitation to go into the internal subnet. Okay, so let's start with our first component, which is our game facilitation component. So the game facilitation component starts off with CTFD. So CTFD is a popular CTF management platform, and it has 3 services. So there's the CTFD application. Of course, we're going to need somewhere to store our data. So that's going to be our MariaDB database. And so that we're not hitting the database every time, meaning we're not like invoking disk IO every time that a user makes a request for some information. We have a Redis cache in between these 2. Okay. And all of these containers, okay, remember we can run multiple services on the same host because all of these services are containerized. So that was kind of the whole point of doing that. And all of these services are isolated together. We use Docker Compose to connect them. So CTFD provides us with things like registration, flag submission, a scoreboard, a hint system, and it's also a file server for our file-based challenges. CTFD is probably the most boring component of the CTF, to be honest, even though it's the one that you probably interact with the most. Okay, so that was CTFD. The next thing, so we have file-based challenges. What about hosted challenges now? So for hosted challenges, we're going to use something called Kubernetes. Okay, and Kubernetes is a very large subject. But so I'm just going to read to you like the Wikipedia definition, and then I'm going to try to like dig into it a little bit. So according to Wikipedia, Kubernetes is this open source container orchestration system for automating computer application deployment, scaling, and management. So unless you actually use Kubernetes, you probably have no idea what that means. But you should know that, well, actually, before delving into the benefits, let me actually tell you kind of like my process, and then we will go over the benefits. So let's say that you have a challenge, and that challenge is called All Your Bases. This is actually a cryptography challenge that was in our CTF, and it was maintained by Brandon West. So the challenge is already developed. So the first thing that we want to do is we start with the Docker container. So remember this Docker file? So first we're going to specify our recipe. And you can see here that I have various lines, which are going to create an image for the challenge that I have here. So what's happening here is, so I'm copying all of the source code for the challenge into the container, into this directory here. I am changing my working directory to this working directory. And then I'm installing a whole bunch of dependencies that my challenge, or sorry, Brandon's challenge relies on. And then once somebody starts the container, this is the command that will execute. This is the process that will execute to actually make that challenge live. So here we've specified the recipe for our cake, if we want to go back to that analogy. Our next step is that we actually want to, so we want to bake the cake, and then we want to send the cake to the person who needs to eat the cake. Okay, if you can think of it like that. So we build, we tag, and then we push the image that we have created, so this thing over here, all the way to something called a container registry. And a container registry is nothing complicated. It's just some space that you use to store your Docker images, so that that image is now accessible by Kubernetes. So by doing a Docker build, we bake the cake. By doing a Docker tag, we essentially say that this cake is destined for Google Container Registry. And then we push the image, which means we upload the image to Google Container Registry. Okay, and that lives in our GCP project. Now, this whole process we actually managed to automate with a small bash script. The bash script actually goes a little bit further and also deploys the container on Kubernetes and opens a firewall port to provide you access to that challenge. Okay, so we have specified our recipe. We have built our, we have baked our cake and pushed it to the container registry. And then finally, we actually need to deploy it. So we want to deploy this challenge to Kubernetes so that all of you can actually access it. So when we deploy a challenge on Kubernetes, we create something called a deployment object. Okay, there are many types of object in Kubernetes, but we're going to use something called the deployment. If the challenge is TCP-based, we are going to expose that challenge using something called a node port service. If that challenge is web-based, we're going to expose it using Ingress Nginx. So that probably doesn't mean anything, again, if you don't really know anything about Kubernetes. So let me actually show you a bit of an example. So what you can see here is the resources that I provisioned for my container, or for my challenge. Yeah, thank you. Cool. So when I say resources, I mean I can create a file. It's like this, called resources.yaml. And that file actually provides like a, what do you call it? It's like a declarative statement about what I want the end state of my challenge to look like. So the end state that we want is for that challenge to be live on the internet for people to access. Okay, the way we do that is using this deployment. So I'm just going to call out a couple of things in this config file here. So first, we need to tell this deployment file, or we need to tell Kubernetes, where is the image that your container is based on? Where do I find your challenge? And you give it a URL like this. So you can see here, this is gcr.io. This is the address of our registry. This here is our CTF project. And then this is kind of, this is what I named the container. Okay. Then I can also set various things. So most of you, when they probably connected to a challenge, you probably thought you were all connecting to the same challenge. But in fact, what Kubernetes allows me to do is it allows me to replicate challenges. So for every challenge that you had that you thought you were connecting to, there was actually anywhere from 3 to 7 replicas of that challenge at any point in time. You still go to the same URL in your browser, or you still connect using the same like Netcat connection or SSH connection, but Kubernetes on the back end is actually routing different people to different containers that are live. Okay. Another interesting thing that you can see here is that you can set resource limits for your containers. So I can say, for example, that my container or this challenge is only going to have, so when it's going to request like a certain amount of CPU and a certain amount of memory, okay, and Kubernetes is going to provision that many resources, like that much CPU and that much memory by default. But then we also set a limit that says, okay, we're going to give you this much, and you can go beyond this much, but not more than the limits that we set here. Okay, and this is good because essentially I can make sure that one challenge is not like going to start growing and growing and growing until it eats up all resources, and then a whole bunch of other challenges are starting to go down. Another way of doing this, which we didn't do, is you can do something called, I think, horizontal pod autoscaling, which means that Kubernetes will actually handle setting the number of replicas and setting the resource limits. I was scared to do that because I didn't know what effect that would have on cost, but that might be something that we want to explore for next year. Okay, so this is a deployment. Again, we specify where our image is, where is our challenge, how many replicas do we want to have, what are the limits that we want to give to it. But actually, we still are not telling Kubernetes about, put this challenge live, put this challenge on the internet, right? And the way that we do that is by specifying something called a service, which is a different kind of Kubernetes object. So here we're saying that we are going to expose our challenge on port 80 on a Kubernetes node, which is just a node is just like a host or a computer, right? Just a VM, a virtual machine. Okay. So we had, this challenge was on 30,000, another challenge is on 30,001, another challenge is on 30,002, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, this is if it was a TCP-based challenge. I'm also going to show you an example of like a web-based challenge. So web-based challenges were a bit different because, well, for various reasons, they're different. They're stateful. There's like session information that you have to maintain. And Kubernetes assumes things are stateless by default, or at least deployments are. So we use this kind of entry point called ingress nginx to use nginx to actually provide access to challenges which are stateful. So if you look at challenge.yaml here, oh, actually, whoops, this is not the right file. Resources. You can see here that what I do is I use kind of like nginx. This just creates an nginx block, server block, if you're familiar with that. And this is a PHP challenge, so it's gonna just look exactly like you would configure in a service block. And then I specify these cookies here to make sure that your requests are going to the same container every time, so that you don't end up, having like one request go to one replica and another request go to another replica. That will mess things up, and you're going to think you're doing something wrong. And this was a big problem that we hit, but we fixed that by doing something called session affinity, and this is cookie-based session affinity, where we actually set a cookie in your browser that tells your browser, tells Kubernetes which challenge replica we want your request to go to, so that all of your requests go to the same replica. And then you can see here that we actually specify like a URL. So this is why you could go to like request-hell.ctf.issessions.ca, and you would end up landing on this challenge. This is something called a name-based virtual hosting scheme. Okay, so this is Kubernetes. So all right, so we've really gone down into the weeds now. What are actually the benefits of using Kubernetes? That's kind of what I want you to remember. The advantages of using Kubernetes are very simple, right? So first, it's self-healing. If a container was to go down for whatever reason, Kubernetes will automatically restart that container for me, meaning that they will restart my challenge for me, okay? The other one, which we already talked about, is replication, right? Because I have multiple replicas, I can distribute resources more evenly. I only have a few people in each challenge. 3, it's scalability. So I can keep increasing the number of replicas, and that's really easy to change for me on game day, right? I literally just have to go to that file. I have to change the number from like 3 to 7, for example, and all of a sudden, more instances of that challenge are going to pop up. And finally, we can set resource limits for all the reasons, and that's a benefit for all the reasons that I mentioned before. Okay, so that's our game facilitation component. What you will see here is, so this is our hosted challenges subnet. We have 3 nodes. Challenges will run, like these are again Docker containers. They're going to run on these 3 nodes. And then your traffic is going to go in, and it's going to get load balanced to each of these 3 nodes using a service that we're just about to talk about. Okay. All right, so let's now talk about the access component. The access component, again, deals with how your traffic actually travels through our environment, and there's a lot of like security implications or security related things in the access components. So why don't we actually go through a kind of mini threat model? Okay. So when we're thinking about, when we actually started thinking about ISSessions CTF and like making it online, we were really worried because we're like, maybe somebody's going to like launch a denial of service attack against us. Maybe because all the challenges are on the internet, people are going to like, try to kill the challenges. There was a whole bunch of ways that either the players or some opportunistic attacker can actually sabotage our environment. What we were concerned about the most was pretty much a loss of availability because of like a server going down and then cheating mostly. And we thought that these would happen because of like a threat actor who's like going to be an attacker. So somebody not just attacking us, they're just attacking like a segment of the internet. Or it's going to be like a disgruntled or some unethical player, right? And of course, we also considered things like data theft, right? Like if somebody steals user data, and we were collecting things like IP addresses, email addresses, names. So all that stuff had to be protected as well. And then there was the possibility as well of somebody stealing like our challenge solutions. So these are all the threats that we faced. Now, we thought that these were more likely, purely because the latter two actually require a lot of like work, and really the infrastructure is only up for 2 days. And by default, we had a whole bunch of we had, I think, good security hygiene, so it would have been really difficult for somebody to actually gain access. I would say the easiest way for somebody to actually gain access to the environment and steal data would have been to like steal our laptop or something. Like somebody steals my laptop or steals Yusef's laptop. And that's, obviously a threat, but it's minuscule compared to what most CTFs face, which are usually loss of availability and people trying to cheat. So what are some attacks that people can launch against us? Again, things like resource abuse and sabotage. So to give you an example there is that, somebody SSHs into a machine and runs something that's really resource intensive. And essentially they end up, because that container has hit its resource limits, it's just going to keep going down over and over and over again. So we don't want something like that to happen. For brute forcing, we don't want somebody to like start trying to brute force the login form or the registration form, or even the flag submission box, right? Somebody's just trying to guess flags, right? Like just using a small Python script that they wrote. And then there was things like exploitation of public services. So, somebody finds an exploit in CTFD, somebody finds an exploit in Nginx, any kind of public service. So these are the stuff we were concerned about. Again, loss of availability, opportunistic attackers, that's what we were really more concerned about, people cheating. And the way that we kind of mitigated those threats is by doing the following. So on the first threat, which is like loss of availability, we had to think about things like load balancing. So making sure that we are evenly distributing traffic to our servers so that not a single server can get overwhelmed. We were thinking about things like rate limiting. So this is something that you can configure in Nginx. And it allows you to essentially say that if somebody tries to like send like a crap ton of requests at our CTF platform, just block their IP for like 10 minutes or something like that. We had to put caps on the number of simultaneous connections that somebody could make per IP. So for example, if I had a challenge, like an SSH challenge, and you started like 50 connections to it, and you had 50 shells, that means you're consuming all the resources in that challenge and nobody else can connect to it. So that's another thing that we had to think of. The same logic applies for things like connection timeout, and then limits on the CPU and memory in a Kubernetes cluster. And then we were behind Cloudflare, so we had like the DDoS protection that comes free with our free tier Cloudflare account. Okay, so definitely loss of availability is what we were thinking about. We put a whole bunch of stuff in place to protect against that. From a data theft perspective, we didn't really put like very sort of targeted mitigations, but it was mostly just good security hygiene. Like we tried to keep our security hygiene, good. So we were using things like key-based auth for SSH. We were not storing any secrets in any of the GitHub repositories that we were using. We had strong passwords for admin accounts. We used LastPass to store pretty much all of our passwords. We were using fully patched services, so only the latest version of CTFD, only the latest version of Nginx, and so on and so forth, like restricting access to trusted individuals and actually having TLS pretty much everywhere in our environment. Okay, so why am I doing this mini threat model? It's because the services that I'm going to present next really deal with all of these things. So we're going to introduce 2 new services, and we're going to put those in our DMZ subnet. And these are kind of like the entry points into our environment. So here we have HAProxy. And if you remember, you connected to challenges.ctf.issessions.ca, right? And what HAProxy was doing, it was providing load balancing to Node 1, Node 2, and Node 3 in the Kubernetes cluster, right? So you connected to challenges.ctf.issessions.ca, and then there's some port. And what HAProxy was making sure of is that you don't find out the IP address of an individual node and then try to overwhelm that node. Instead, HAProxy takes all the traffic, and HAProxy has things like, again, rate limiting and a cap on the number of connections and so on to protect any single node from being overwhelmed. The same thing was basically being applied in Nginx, but here it was being applied like on a per IP basis, essentially. And so we had like a limit on the number of requests that you could send to CTFD per second. So to look at these 2 services, so Nginx was actually acting again as a reverse proxy to CTFD, and it provided things like rate limiting, SSL termination, request logging, and then in the future we're also going to put load balancing. So right now we only have 1 instance of CTFD, but maybe in the future we want to have more than 1 instance of CTFD, and we want to provide load balancing for all of those services. Request logging was pretty important because we wanted to sort of monitor the environment. So you can see here in the screenshots that I took, this is what configuring rate limiting in Nginx looks like. So we can say that, here we're going to limit you to 40 requests per second. If you go over that, Nginx will start slowing you down. If you bypass something called a burst limit, eventually your IP will be banned for 10 or so minutes. It was the same thing about the number of simultaneous connections that you could have, and we set that to about 15. To be honest, this is pretty generous. 40 requests per second for somebody clicking on a web page is a lot. But again, I didn't want to prevent you from I don't want to. It was my first time setting this up, basically, and I didn't want you to feel. I didn't want weird things to happen. Now, eventually, weird things did end up happening because of Cloudflare. But we fixed that, and that was pretty much fixed by the next day. But yeah, just so you know, this is generous. Typically, it's not this high. This is how you kind of do the same in HAProxy. So here I set a timeout, right? If you are connected to a challenge for more than 5 minutes and you're idle, HAProxy will automatically disconnect you. Then for each challenge, I have a front end like this, where it says, okay, at most, this challenge can only have 50 people or 50 IP addresses connected to it. Okay. So that 1, we stay under those resource limits, and 2, we stop anybody who's trying to create multiple connections to the same IP. And then this is the load balancing portion. So here we are load balancing to node 1, node 2, and node 3 using round robin node balancing. So the first connection goes to node 1, the second connection goes to node 2, the third connection goes to node 3, and then the fourth connection goes back to node 1. Okay. So once again, this is what it looks like. These are providing access to our environment. All right, so then we have the monitoring component. The monitoring was done using primarily 2 services. Okay, the first service, or set of services, I would say, is the Elk stack. So it's Elastic, Logstash, and Kibana. And then we were also making use of some logging that was native to Google Cloud Platform, which was Google Stackdriver. So the Elk stack, Elastic is like a search engine. You can think of it that way. Logstash allows you to process data that is coming from the applications that are sending logs, and it allows you to transform the data. And then you have Kibana, and Kibana allows you to visualize the data. Okay. Okay, so let's actually take a look at some of the things that we were trying to monitor. So the data sources that we were ingesting are things like submissions, logins and logouts, registrations. Were people using hints or were they not using hints? We were also taking a look at the requests that were coming to our platform by making use of Nginx logging. So here you have the access log and the error log. And then really, really important, again, going back to the whole availability thing, right, and making sure that our servers are up 100% of the time, we were looking at things like system health monitoring, container health monitoring, and also application health. So we were looking at, and this is where we use the stack driver, like GCP native stuff. We were collecting things like CPU utilization, disk utilization, and memory utilization. So what are some of like the questions that we were asking from this data, right? So how many, for example, how many solves per team or per user? How many participants did we have over time to look at things like engagement over time, right? Like were people just quitting the CTF, 3 hours into it or 4 hours into it? That would be pretty bad. We would want to know if that was happening. We were also doing like some basic security monitoring, again, around the brute forcing angle. Was anybody trying to brute force a login form? So is there a lot of failed logins from a certain IP or a certain username to CTFD? And it's the same thing for the number of flag submissions. So I got an alert every time somebody tried to brute force the flag submission box. Now, that only happened once, to be honest, and I kind of decided to ignore it because that person clearly wasn't doing it using a script, but they probably were just submitting like their flags all at the same time. So, I let that slide. That's a perfectly valid use case. And this is actually a really cool part. So for system health monitoring and container health monitoring, in GCP, you can actually say, you can set these rules that say, okay, if my CPU or my memory is over a certain threshold for like 3 minutes or more, I want you to send me a text. And that's really cool because it means that I will always find out if something is running out of memory before the user does. And I did get a couple of texts actually for a couple of the hosted challenges, and then I went ahead and increased their resource limits or added more replicas. So this was really, really cool. Something that I just like learned about doing this. For like applications, let's say that somebody is like, exploiting a vulnerability in CTFD. Well, I was looking for like 500 errors, right? Because typically when you try to run like an exploit, sometimes that causes like a server to crash, right? And you see like a whole bunch of 500 errors. So if there was a problem in the platform or somebody was trying to exploit it or, just something wasn't working, I wanted to, again, know before the user did. Okay. And so here's some examples, like GCP alerting you can see here. So for example, I have a threshold up here at 60%. And then I can say that anytime this series is above 60%, send me an email or send me a text. Okay. To be honest, though, we never, like for a VM, we never hit that. I was really paranoid and I way over provisioned. And we pretty much never cracked like over 40% CPU. So now that you sort of know what we were logging and the types of questions that we were asking, how did I actually get these logs in the first place? And I'm talking specifically about like CTFD. We're going to just use that as an example. Like there's other places where we got logs. But essentially, when I first looked at the logs being generated by CTFD, I was really tired. I had been working for like 6 or 7 hours. And I was like, no way, Aristotle, okay, was speaking to me. Okay. CTFD was pretty much spitting philosophy at me, okay? It said, none solved none with a value of none. And I was like, how could it be? How could nothing solve nothing with a value of nothing? And I was like, oh, this must be Aristotle speaking to me. Okay, but alas, it was not. And the thing that shocked me is that Nick, during his lectures, like in forensics, would always say, like, in the real world, logs are not organized, they're not standardized. And I was like, that's the moment when I believed that. Like, that was, to me, proves that. Obviously, the people that maintain CTFD did not think logging was good enough to have to test it in the latest release that they pushed out. So I actually had to go and solve this, because otherwise we would just have no submission logging. We would have 0 game statistics. So what I did is I actually went into the code, I rewrote CTFD logging. I added a FileBeat sidecar container. So this is just a container. Again, it reads the logs from disk and then sends them over to my Elk server, which allows me to, again, like, visualize the data and that sort of thing. So the way that I did it is I actually wrote the CTFD logs in CSV format, which I kind of regret. I kind of wish I had done it in JSON. But then what I did is I sent it over to Logstash to parse that data. So I used the Logstash's CSV filter to do that, because, again, the data was in CSV. You can also use Grok, by the way, which is a way of, like, using regex to match patterns in logs. But in this case, this module was, like, readily available, and so that's why I used it. And then once the data was parsed, once the data was in Kibana for me to visualize, I built a whole bunch of dashboards on the data. So I had a dashboard for, like, flag submission brute forcing. I had a dashboard for game statistics, and so on. So this is an example of a Logstash parser. So you can see here, these are submissions. I'm using the CSV module. So I'm saying that the separator that I used is just a colon, and these are the columns that I want to parse. So exactly what you would expect, things like participant ID, participant name, team ID, team name, etc. And then I'm here converting the data types, and I'm removing sort of the original message, which has, like, the whole event in it and is not really parsed, so I'm just deleting that. Same thing for Nginx access logs, just to show you what Grok looks like. Again, it's like a way of using, again, regex to, like, parse logs, or parse anything, to be honest. And this is what I was how I was parsing the Nginx logs. One really cool thing to look here, if you ever wondered, like, how do companies find out your location from your IP address, they use something called GeoIP location. And in Logstash, all you need is basically these 3 lines here, and all of a sudden, I know where everybody is. So I know if somebody's connecting from Canada or India. Or we actually had 10% of the people connecting were from India, which was really cool to see. Again, COVID-19 world, we had to make sure everything was possible. These were some examples of the Kibana dashboards that we had. So you can see here, these are some of the stuff that I published when people were asking for stats. So you could do things like bar graphs, heat maps. Okay, and so there we go. Our monitoring component is now here. And the only thing that we have left, really, before we bring it all together is our management component. And this is really, basically, we just had it at a VPN so that the administrator of the environment can go ahead and access it. Okay. They have a management VM that has all the tools that they need. They connect to the WireGuard VPN that I have here, and then that WireGuard VPN allows them to manage the environment. We were storing pretty much all of our challenges in GitHub repositories, so file-based and hosted challenges, just like the example that I showed you. And then for all passwords that this environment uses, with the exception of, like, SSH keys, which I'm still kind of trying to find a solution for, we were using a LastPass password vault. I'll talk about that more in just a second. So that was a lot of stuff, and I've been talking for a very long time. If I've been talking for this much, you can imagine it actually took a long time to set all of this up. Now imagine that every single year, somebody had to go and do that, okay? And they had to start from scratch, right? And they didn't have all of the ideas that I have now had in my head since, the beginning of January when I started working on this. Okay. So now what we get to do is to bring everything together through the use of DevOps tools, and we're going to try to automate actually the entire build. So how do we actually go about automating all of this? So the way that I split it in my head is there's really 5 stages. So the first stage is the initial setup. So well, I'll get into the stages in a second. The initial setup is just like preparing your project for automation, and this was pretty much manual. You would also then have to provision cloud resources. So this would mean like reserving IP addresses, reserving, like creating firewall rules, making just hosts pop up, provisioning that Google Kubernetes engine cluster that I spoke about. Then once those hosts were up, we actually had to configure those hosts, and that's like installing dependencies on those hosts to make our applications or services run. Then we have service deployment. So this is now that our dependencies are there, we actually want to deploy services onto those VMs. And actually, because all the plumbing has already been done, we've configured our firewall rules, we've configured our IP addresses. Now you can connect to everything. And then finally, there's some application configuration, and the application configuration is also manual. So this is like you creating dashboards in Kibana, or creating a user, right? All of that stuff you can do through the GUI, and it's fairly easy to do. You can also automate that stuff using APIs and stuff, but I chose not to. Most of the automation pieces, these 3 pieces here in the middle, are being done by gcloud, which is a command line utility that essentially allows me to say, I want you to make an IP address for me now, or I want you to make a VM for me. And then Ansible drives the whole system, essentially. You can define Ansible tasks that say, okay, first I want you to install this thing on this host, and then I want you to deploy this service onto that host. So this is where I was using Ansible. All of the services were hosted on GitHub, and they actually get pulled from GitHub down onto the hosts that they need to run on. So let's actually go through every stage really quickly. So initial setup, this was pretty much manual. So you're probably going to have to set up a GCP project. You're going to have to set up a GCP service account so that your management VM can actually connect to GCP. So you get like a private key to do that. You're probably going to want to have to create like a LastPass password vault, or really any password vault that has an API that you can communicate with programmatically. So, and then you have to like seed, that password vault with secrets. You would have to set up that management VM that we spoke about, and you would have to install all the tools that you would need on it. So things like gcloud, Ansible, LPass, etc. We spoke about gcloud and Ansible. LPass is basically the command line version of LastPass. I can log into LastPass command line and retrieve a password from it. And then there's a whole bunch of SSH keys that we have to generate to make sure that we can access certain things. Okay, the second stage is cloud resource provisioning. So I wrote a whole bunch of bash scripts. Okay, there are 5 in total, and they represent various components of the build. And you can see this is what gcloud sort of looks like. So here in this one, this is how you would reserve an internal IP address. You just go gcloud compute addresses create. Here is how you would create a firewall rule, right? So gcloud compute firewall rules create. So pretty easy, to be honest. Not too bad. The infrastructure nerds in the room are going to say, well, why would you do this? Why don't you just use Terraform? I understand completely. You have to remember, this is my first time doing this, like anything like this, like using cloud even. So I don't want to complicate things too much. So that was one reason. And 2, I didn't want to put in a whole bunch of frameworks in place, because it means that the next person needs to understand all of those things. And if they become overwhelmed with all the stuff that I put in, they're going to end up maybe not even using the thing at all. And I really didn't want that to happen. But I am definitely like open to creating sort of like another branch, for example, which has Terraform instead of gcloud scripts. Okay. So that's us provisioning resources. So now we've, set up our VMs, set up our IP addresses, set up our hosts. We've deployed that cluster. Then we actually have to configure those hosts, right? Our applications are not just going to run on those magically. So we might have to install some dependencies like Docker, right? We need the Docker runtime for our Docker containers to run. We're going to maybe need to create some accounts. We're going to have to transfer credentials. So again, all of our services are hosted in GitHub, which means that my host needs to be able to access the GitHub repository. So I would need to give it the SSH key that allows it to access that repository and be able to pull down the service that I'm trying to deploy. There's also, you might have to alter some system properties. Like for example, Elk has a whole guide on how you have to change certain like memory parameters, I guess I will call them, for the cluster to run properly if you want to deploy a production cluster. So this is an example of an Ansible playbook. Ansible playbooks are the coolest thing in the world because they are super, super, super easy to read and they are self-documenting. So you can see here, this is just a task to create a user called CTF. Okay, I want to add this user to the Docker and sudo groups, and I want to set the password for this user. So this is where LastPass comes in. Instead of actually hard coding the password here and then having to commit that to a GitHub repository, I can just use this plugin that comes with Ansible to pull that password from LastPass, which is really, really, really cool to do. Like I was struggling. I had something like 25 different credentials that I had to maintain, and they were all hard-coded in all these files that I had on my laptop, and this kind of solved all those problems. Not a single password is actually hard-coded in anything that is part of the CTF infrastructure, which is really cool. And also another advantage of using Ansible is that I'm not deploying this playbook, as they call it, to a single host. I can deploy this playbook to multiple hosts at the same time. So for example, here I'm deploying it to all hosts in the DMZ and all hosts in the internal subnet. And so that way I don't have to so imagine if you're doing this manually, right? You'd have to log into every machine and actually create this user and set the password of this user. There's a lot of room to make mistakes there. Here, I get to do it on 4 different machines, all at the same time, with something that is incredibly readable, and something that is, by the way, also stateful. So what you see here, no matter how many times I run this playbook, the same end result will be there. Even if I've already done something before, it won't try to do it again, and that's another great advantage of Ansible playbooks. And so yeah, finally, so we have service deployment. So this is again driven by Ansible. So essentially the way that I did it. But to be honest, I kind of want to change this now. But I will put it there, is that you clone the service repository from the host where you're trying to deploy that service on. So Ansible will do this. Then we're going to transfer our TLS certificates, any TLS certificates that service needs. We're going to transfer our secrets in a .env file, right? The .env file is going to be populated from our LastPass password vault. Then because now we have our code, we have our secrets, we have our certificates, we pretty much have everything that we need to start building our image. We build the image and we start the container, effectively deploying the service. And then we obviously don't want to keep those secrets in plain text on the host, so we delete that secrets file. And that's how services actually eventually get deployed. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much my presentation. The last thing that I will finish off with is what I did is I actually took pretty much everything that I thought was reusable from what I've just described, and I've actually made it into kind of its own CTF builder framework or project. And I've spent the last 3 weeks or so. Kyle is a slave driver. He's like, I need documentation, man. And so I sat down and I wrote this documentation for everybody and for future exec teams to use. And that's why right now, basically, I'm going to introduce something called Chickpea. So Chickpea, pronounced chickpea, which is essentially a semi-automated CTF builder. The reason I say semi-automated is because you still have to stop every once in a while to check that things are okay, that things have deployed correctly. So it's not fully automated yet. So but hopefully it makes the job of the next person, aka Kyle, and maybe the person after them, that much better. I started work on this on the 1st of January, and you now know all of the secrets that are, contained in this sort of framework. Just remember, I'm a total beginner. For the infrastructure nerds that are in the room, I welcome your feedback. Like, if you see something that is horrible, right, or something that you just don't agree with, I would love to know about it, and I would love to improve this. And if you actually want to contribute yourself, I want you to. Okay. This will all be very public very soon on the ISSessions GitHub, so that pretty much anyone can go and set up ISSessions CTF if they wanted to. Nash is actually helping me peer review the docs right now, and there's something like 30,000 words in docs. So you should be able to pretty much, anyone really will be able to do this. And hopefully this will make future CTFs much easier to build. That's my hope anyway. I hope that Kyle will take this and will improve upon it. I'll also, help out and try to contribute as well. There are certain things that I still want to change. But more importantly, so this is chickpea, right? Everything goes back to hummus. I thought we started the year with hummus, we should end it with hummus. Why is it called chickpea? It's actually called chickpea because of a reason that is dear to my heart. So this project is really dedicated to the 5 incredible partners in crime with me on the ISSessions 2020 to 2021 executive team. Strangely enough, right, the universe wanted it this way. If you take all of their names and you line them up in this specific order, you get the word, and you take the last name, the first letter of their last names, you get chickpea. And chickpeas have been the subject of many of our conversations. Chickpeas are the main ingredient of hummus, of course. And I can honestly say that those 5 chickpeas that I was on the executive team with, they made my life taste like hummus every single day for the last year. So I'm so thankful for them, and this project is dedicated to them. I hope that Nash and Kurt, who are still on the executive team, will share the hummus with with the new execs as well. So yeah, that's my presentation. If you have any questions,
Wow. Just wow. Wow.
Holy.
I don't even, I can't even, I don't
What?
even, I just,
I'm crying in the club over here, guys.
oh my God, man.
I have push to talk, so I'm just gonna.
Honestly.
Well, it's for you guys. I love you guys, you know that. But yeah, we built something cool, I think, and I want people to remember the execs that were on the last team. So you're all awesome. Anyway, any questions?
I have a question. Did you
Yes,
did you
sir.
submit a pull request for that the logging mod that you did to CTFD?
No. So I'll tell you why. It's what prevented me from doing that was the fact that my fix was like a very short-term fix. It wasn't like a proper rewrite of logging in CTFD. That is something that I definitely want to try and tackle because I now understand the code layout. So I actually, I chose not to kind of do a pull request. Another reason was, what else? So dynamic challenges, right? The solution that I had only worked for static challenges. Okay, so if I had submitted a pull request, it would have been an incomplete solution. So what I will probably do now is maybe start off from my old solution, and then go and then try to implement dynamic challenges. I want to do a bunch of things differently. I don't want to be logging things in CSV format anymore. That was just easy short-term fix. I want to make a JSON. I want to solve the whole issue of dynamic challenges change scores over time. So even the whole logging framework doesn't even make sense anymore. that CTFT has right now. So it's another project which I will start from scratch in. Now, just so you know, by the way, Kyle, this is important for you. So the way that I'm deploying services right now, I'm not including Logstash. I'm just including like a vanilla version. And that's because you're going to eventually have to update CTFT.
Yeah,
right?
say that one more time. You cut out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Where was I? So what I
Logstash?
included. Yeah, what I included in like Chickpea is just vanilla CTFT. I didn't include my modifications. And again, that's because you would have to update CTFT. And CTFT is like a project that gets CVEs like all the time, right? So if you have to update it, basically all of my changes will be erased anyway. So for now, this is not something that is reusable, and so I chose not to include it. So this is something that you're going to have to work on from scratch. And if you need help, I'm there, of course.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're gonna have to have a private conversation.
Yes, sir. we have another 4 hours together. You're gonna need to change from Logstash to Fluentd. Yeah, that's what I hear. So apparently Logstash is really slow in like large environments. I mean, in this case, it doesn't matter. Logstash is a
Wait, I think
low
you
parser.
said you're using mostly FileBeat anyways, right? If I understood the presentation.
So FileBeat collects the logs, and then they are processed in Logstash. So they're modified and put into like an Elasticsearch document in Logstash.
Oh, for some reason I thought FileBeat went directly to Elasticsearch.
It can. So that is something that you can set up. But in this case, I chose to write my own parsers because the logs, as you saw, were terrible, like absolutely terrible.
Makes sense. Great presentation. That was
Thank you.
phenomenal.
Any more questions from anybody? CCK's typing.
It's more about elastic licensing and open distro not making a Logstash equivalent.
Cool.
CK, can you explain that a bit more? I don't really know enough about that. So what is the issue? And in the meantime, if anybody has questions, please let me know.
Feel free to hop on mic, CK, if you want.
Yeah, sure. So, like, from what I understand, Elasticsearch wasn't happy that Amazon and other cloud providers were selling Elasticsearch as a cloud offering,
Mm-hmm.
and so they adjusted their open source licensing, which got a bunch of people mad. And then a bunch of companies got together and they made open distro Elasticsearch, which is the true open source license.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
But they
I
only
really-
did for Elasticsearch and Kibana, not for Logstash.
I see. Okay.
So just looking at the time, I do want to wrap things up. So thank you, Louai, for the amazing presentation. I'm sure everyone now can start building their own CTF.
Concurrent CTS next year. Woohoo!
So one thing that is left is we do have a survey that we would like to share with everyone. So if Christian, if you can post it in the streaming questions chat, that would be greatly appreciated. It's just to get some feedback from the community with regards to how we can make things better and provide more value for everyone. So please do fill it out. Take some time. It's not too long, but we would greatly appreciate it. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Nash, for letting me speak.
You're welcome.
Thanks for letting us be here.
You make the club happen, guys.